Game over, man. Game over. Johnny.
You're gonna need a bigger boat. So serious.
I am Iron Man. This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the InSession Film Podcast.
Well, welcome to episode 566 for January 2nd, 2024, and I'm JD Duran.
I was sitting here thinking, is he going to say the wrong year? Because I would probably make that same mistake. I'm also Brendan Cassidy, and I'm still getting used to the fact that it's 2024.
Yeah, no, thanks for joining us, everybody, for this conversation. And it's interesting now that we're sitting here talking about it, because we just released our review of The Iron Claw. I haven't edited that show yet, but I'm almost positive I said 2023 when I opened that show as well.
Man, would have been nice if you did. Jacob would have told you that you did, but no, I mean, I guess it's a mystery until it goes live.
Yep, it's a mystery until then. However, we hope everyone had a great new year. However you celebrate, we hope everyone had a great time with their family, friends. Maybe you watched college football, because that's what I did.
I was going to say,
that's how I brought in the new year.
You had fun. I'm not going to talk about what I did, because I did literally nothing. I wouldn't say literally nothing. There's no literal nothing, but it's a lot of recovery after a massive sinus infection. Yeah. You might still be able to hear it. For those of you listening, I've got a little bit of a deeper voice. I might do a few coughs here and there. I was actually at the doctor for it. I hit a 104-degree fever at one point. And my body was just not used to it. I don't get sick very often, JD. I think I told you this. So the fact that it was such a new experience for me, I think, is where my body really reacted so negatively to it.
Yeah.
Thankfully, I'm doing better, but my voice is still not quite there. Literally did nothing on New Year's. But then on New Year's Day, there were a few fun games. There's one in particular that I know you want to talk about.
There were definitely a few fun games. It was interesting because I didn't really think about it all too much leading up to the game. I actually kept myself pretty busy. Yeah. We took down our Christmas decorations, and, I got to hang out with my sons, took a nap with the little one, so I didn't really think about it too much. And then it gets close to game time. And I guess for context, for listeners out there that have no idea what we're talking about, the college football playoff, the semifinals were on New Year's Day. And one of the teams playing was my Michigan Wolverines. They were playing Alabama.
The Rose Bowl.
And I know some of you listening, maybe many of you listening, watching this, are not sports fans or college football fans, but stick with me for a moment, because I do want to get a little personal with this. So some insight into who I am and how I respond to.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear this. I have some thoughts on the game, but I really want to hear what you have to say.
Because I grew up such a rabid Michigan football fan. My mom was a huge Michigan fan. You grow up in Michigan. My brother and my sisters are big fans. It is something that we always did together that brought us together. And even to this day, when the games are on, even though I live in South Florida, my brother lives in Indiana, when the Michigan games are on, we are on the phone throughout the entire game talking to each other. All 4.5 hours, we are talking to each other on the phone the whole time. So it's something we
That's
watch
honestly
and
adorable.
together.
I did not even know that. I knew you had a familial fandom for Michigan, but I didn't know that that's how you actually collectively watch games together. Now that you're all in different states,
that's how we collectively experience it. So me and my brother, we still talk through it. We have, and now that our families are involved, I can still, I can hear his kids in the background. You can hear Brandy and Sam in the back. So it's a fun way for us to get to spend time together despite the distance. And so we are brought together through Michigan football. So the fact that Michigan is in the playoffs, that in itself is exciting, but especially to have this experience with my brother and his family made it all the better. That's for sure. And so the game kicks off. I'm extremely nervous. And that's when it really set in that we were in the Rose Bowl. And the Rose Bowl is the granddaddy of them all, as they say. If you're a Big Ten fan or if you're a Pac-12 fan, you know the Rose Bowl intimately. It's such a big part of the history of those two conferences. Yeah. So Michigan being in the Rose Bowl, for the first time in God knows how many years, 15, 20 years. It's been quite a long time. They haven't won the Rose Bowl since 97 when they last won the national championship game.
Yeah.
And so it's crazy that we're even in this situation. They're ranked number 1 in the country, which is another factor that I can't wrap my mind around.
Yeah.
But the game kicks off. They're a little sluggish at first, but they keep in the game. They're winning at halftime, 13-10. And then the third quarter comes, and Michigan is devastatingly outplayed.
Yeah.
They didn't lose the lead, but they did enough that as soon as the fourth quarter started, they did lose the lead.
Fourth quarter was still 13-10, wasn't it?
Yeah, at the start, at the very start.
Yeah,
but it didn't take long. It was like in the first minute of the fourth quarter, Alabama scores a touchdown.
Yep.
And they take a 4-point lead. Michigan still can't get anything going on offense. Eventually, Alabama gets another field goal, which was pivotal. So now it's just a 7-point game.
Now it's 20-13.
And so then it comes down to the last 4 minutes of the game. Michigan has one last crack to tie the game. And it's a moment that I'll never forget because me and my brother were having these conversations about legacy. This is what, for this group of players, if they go and score here, they're going to cement themselves. And we had such a great conversation about that. And lo and behold, Michigan in the last 4 minutes of the game, after doing absolutely nothing for the entire second half, they go down and they score this touchdown.
Oh, yeah. It was amazing.
We're losing our minds. Absolutely losing my minds. And what's so incredible about this, and I'll talk about overtime here in a second, but that last touchdown, I'm going to get emotional here, so you have to forgive me. I was so...
Kitty cries not just at movies and family, but also football.
Well, because it ties to family. That's the thing.
That's true. That's true. Good point.
In my childhood, like this was such a formative thing for me as a child. So, and Michigan has not been, for context, another part of this is that Michigan has not had these kind of stakes in a long time. They've never, like the last 2 years, they've been in the playoff, but they weren't competitive. They weren't really in those games. This is a time where, when they tie this game at the end, there's hope. There's a chance they might win this. They might go to the national championship game. I haven't felt that way since 1997. I was 12 years old.
That's
in
amazing, dude. Wow.
So when they scored this touchdown, I became 12 years old again. I became a kid again.
And just imagine how you felt when overtime actually started.
Yes.
And I don't mean to get ahead of you, because at least the way I was perceiving the way overtime was performed between both teams, Michigan just made it look so easy. They made it look so easy.
Yeah, I'll talk about that here in a second. But they scored this touchdown to tie. I'm feeling like a kid again. My brother is feeling the same way. We're both in tears, but the added bonus of it as well. And I wish I had this on video, but in some ways I'm glad I don't, because it's just deeply seared into my brain because I'm such in the moment.
Sure.
That I'm going crazy. I'm screaming and yelling. Sam is watching this on the couch. He doesn't understand the stakes, but he just sees his father deeply excited. He gets up off the couch.
So he knows something good happened.
He gets up off the couch and he's hugging me and he's excited, giving me high fives. And in the midst of the excitement, of course, Brandy is, excited as well. Yeah. In the midst of the excitement, my 9-month-old child, who's sitting down on his little mat on the ground, he sees that we're excited. Of course, he's 9 months. He has no idea what's going on. I wish I had video to show everybody, but
there was palpable and contagious joy in that house.
Exactly. Yeah. So he has no idea what's going on, but he can feel the energy. So he's clapping, he's smiling, and then he does like these little baby screams. These like little baby screams. And he's mimicking our energy. He's mimicking our screams in a very baby kind of way, obviously. So I'm feeling 12. I'm sharing this with my brother, but at the same time, my two boys are very much in the moment as well. Even my little 9-month-old.
Yeah.
I'll never I was laughing
amazing.
so hard. I was crying from like tears of joy and childhood joy.
You basically got a
also-
core workout, right?
Yeah, and at the same
Like
time,
that feeling when you do so many
laughing.
sit-ups, but you're laughing so hard, it basically feels the same way. You got a massive ab workout out of it.
I couldn't stop laughing and smiling at
amazing.
little Andrew with these little baby screams of so excitement and his little claps. Like he's just so excited, but has no
cool.
clue
So
what's
cool, man.
going
So
on.
cool.
It was unreal. And so then we go to overtime, and it's the same thing. Michigan scores. You're
Yep.
still excited.
Yep.
But you got to play defense. So we're like, okay, we have the lead. All we got to do is put out our defense. And Michigan has one of, if not the best defense in the country.
That's it right there.
So Bama gets close. They have a good run. They get to the 4 yard line, 3 or 4 yard line.
Yep.
And there's some good plays. The defense holds strong. It gets to 4th and goal. One last play to end the game. Michigan makes a stop. They go to the national championship.
That's it.
And I love this is where it feels very movie-esque, right?
I heard the Rocky theme playing in the background, even though it wasn't there.
Well, it's just so funny how melodramatic it gets because they get to the line, Michigan calls a timeout.
Yep.
Okay, they come back from the timeout. They go back to the line of scrimmage to the line. Alabama calls a timeout. So then for the third time, they
You
go
make
back
sure
to the
they
play.
remember forever the night they played the Wolverines.
Well, it's just so funny how each team calls a timeout. It's all about the head game, all about the schemes. And from a nerdy schematic football perspective, I could dive into that all day long. But,
for sure. Yeah.
Anyway, the tension is just elongated. So it feels very movie-esque in that way. So the play finally comes, 4th and goal, game on the line.
Yep.
And Michigan gets a stop. And I have not expelled that kind of joyous energy in a sporting contest in a long time.
Yep.
And
I can only
can't
imagine.
even
I
recall.
was so tempted to
lost
fly
my
in
mind.
just to watch that game with you.
I temporarily lost it. I was running throughout the house. I was jumping like crazy. Sam's embracing me, and I'm holding him. My brother's on the phone. His whole family screaming their heads off. It's just this moment I'll never forget. Even they may not win the national championship. Who knows? They may lose to Washington. That happens in a week.
Yeah.
But that game against Alabama will still go down as one of the best memories of my life. And I'm not even being facetious.
Yeah.
That's not just a saying. It truly was one of the best moments of my life. Emotional, joyous,
and
childlike.
I'm so excited to hear that. And I mean, obviously I don't I don't relate to it in that way unless it's, my Penn State Nittany Lions. Now, first off, how fun that the back-to-back Rose Bowl champions last year and this year are your Wolverines and now my Penn State Nittany Lions. So, it's a nice little tie, but granted, it's a little bit different because the Rose Bowl was actually a semifinal game this year, unlike how it was last year. But it's still a nice little connection. And it was really exciting to see the game turn out the way it did, especially there were a few plays that Michigan had where I got a little, ooh, that was a blocked field goal attempt. Ooh, did they just miss that punt return? Ooh, that's a little. There was good recovery there. There was good recovery where it counted, but they were.
Yeah,
I will say JJ McCarthy had a few good trick plays up his sleeve that really surprised me as well.
Yeah, when we move away from the emotional, familial, childlike mentality of it all that I had, and looking at the game itself, it's kind of indicative of Michigan's strength in the sense that they essentially gave that game away. Offensively, they struggled in that second half. They had, as you're talking about, they had so many different special teams issues. And Michigan's special teams is elite. They're one of the best in the country.
Yeah.
Top 10, maybe top 5. Kicking, returning all the way down. They've been flawless all year. And again, that's not me embellishing at all. They've been flawless all year.
Yeah.
A few missed field goals. Aside from that, they've been perfect. They've even had one of the better punters in the Big Ten.
Yeah.
So there was no reason to question the special teams, but all they did in that game was struggle, except for kickoff return. They dominated a few kickoff returns. aside from that, though, the punter struggled a few times. We missed a field goal, a gimme field goal that would have made the game a 1-point game. The 2 dropped punt returns, like they nearly gave that game away, and on the special teams. And you think about those miscues and the offensive woes, the fact that it took all of that for Alabama to maybe win by a touchdown is incredible. The fact that they overcame all of that to win against Alabama, to me,
it shows how defensive of a team that they are. Yeah, absolutely.
Very.
And honestly, I'd say the big thing that really pleased me about the outcome of that game is that it just further proved, and we sort of talked about this when the Final Four was announced a few weeks ago, right? What is Alabama doing there? What are they doing at number 4?
And that's, if you're a Florida State fan, which my wife is, and a lot of people,
that's where I was going with
area,
that.
They're now doubly upset because not only is Florida State left down, but what did Alabama do? Like, because the whole argument was, well, Alabama is the better team because they have their quarterback.
Yeah.
If Jordan Travis was still healthy, then of course you put in Florida State. And
Absolutely.
all the underlying, again, where I'm going to get real nerdy with this, like all of the underlying metrics basically have Florida State and Alabama right next to each other. They're the same team essentially, and I would argue that they had the better quarterback. That Florida State had the better quarterback. So it's no doubt you put in Florida State over Alabama. So the argument came, well, without Florida State's quarterback, we just got to put in Alabama. They're the best team because they have their quarterback. The irony of that is that, and I like Alabama's quarterback. That kid is good. Yeah. He's gonna be better. He's gonna be someone to watch out for next year.
Absolutely, agreed.
But he was sacked like 7 times and threw for 116 yards.
Yep.
You're telling me that Florida State's secondary quarterback cannot do any worse than that or any better? Like he wouldn't have.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Like Milroe didn't do any better than what Florida State's quarterback would have done.
Right.
And so
I'm with you.
And I want to say, like, I think Florida State's quarterback, even though they got destroyed by Georgia, I think he threw for at least 116 yards in that game.
Well, yeah, so, and considering Florida was with only half their original starters
and half
or something
their
like
team.
That.
Yeah, they did, like half their guys didn't even play.
Offline, the incentive for those teams to play these games, and the same thing happened with my Penn State Nittany Lions on the defensive side. Their 2 top corners not playing, which there's another narrative there about those fans who are traveling so far to see these games, only to see such a half-assed by these teams. So it's even more of a screw you to the fans than I think these people realize. But it just goes to show the lack of incentive for these teams and these players to play when they're not given their proper due.
Well, and that's the thing. And that's another conversation for another time, maybe another podcast. But
we always joke we're going to start InSession Sports at some point.
But you are right. I mean, for the fans paying to go to these games, like my wife went to the Orange Bowl because it's in our backyard over here.
She went with Sam, right?
She took my oldest son Sam, and they went to the game, and look, it was a good experience for Sam because that was his first football game. I wish I could have been there to be.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's sweet. Okay.
Yeah, so that was his first football game. It was, and he had a great time. It was a good experience. But like, you think about the money you pay to go to those games, and then literally half of the starters of Florida State doesn't play.
Yeah,
and it comes down to incentive, especially financial incentive. I get why the players don't, but you do kind of screw the fans. So they have to figure something else out there. Yeah. Anyway, that's another story for another time. But anyway, my whole point in all of this is to say that, it wasn't just that Michigan won and that they're going to the national championship. It's that it was it's a memory that is etched deep into my soul that I'll never forget. It was unbelievable.
I will say, as much as I'm looking forward to that game between Michigan and Washington, I would have loved to see it go to Texas, just to see an internal InSession Film battle.
I do feel bad for Ryan. I do.
Yeah, he was a good sport about it. I'll give him a lot of credit. Yeah, because and I do think he's right. This is just the start of what we're going to see with the Texas Longhorns going forward.
Yeah.
I think they're going to get better.
I think so too. They're going to be good. They're going to be good. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that. They're going to be good. All right, let's talk about coffee, our favorite drink in the world.
Yeah. I've been sad, JD, because when you're dealing with a sinus infection, when you're just sick in general, coffee doesn't always hit you in the way that it should. But now that I'm starting to feel better, yeah, I'm going to start pulling myself some coffee cult.
Yep. Need some good coffee. Keep awake. Keep yourself satisfied. And I know all of you in the colder states right now.
Yeah.
It's a great time for coffee.
Absolutely.
It got down into the 50s here in South Florida. People lost their minds. Yes.
Did they close the roads? Did they close everything down?
Just about. I went outside to let out the dog New Year's Eve, and I could see my breath. It was so cold.
That's weird.
And it was very strange.
That's
very
weird.
Strange.
Yeah, you need a cup of warm coffee for that
You
one.
need a cup of warm coffee. That's why we love Coffee Cult. They source specialty grade Arabica coffee from around the world. All kinds of great coffee. But it's not just your typical coffee company that has Arabica coffee beans. No, Coffee Cult is all about the high-end quality. You get a batch of Arabica. Some of them are perfect beans. Some of them have defects. Maybe they're a little brown, chipped. You know, that lessens the quality.
Yeah.
And you can taste that. Coffee Cult will take out those defects. They'll take out the ones that aren't entirely perfect, and they only used the perfect green coffee beans. So the quality is unmatched. It's ethically sourced. It's roasted to order. So the coffee's not just sitting around in some warehouse getting stale. No, they roast to order. Your coffee comes in, they roast it, they ship it, you get it a few days later. So it is guaranteed fresh every single time. And they have all kinds of great coffees, blends, single origins, whatever you're in the mood for. Go to coffeecult.com. That's coffee with a K, cult with a K. Coffeecult.com. Use our code ISF at checkout. You'll get 15% off. Again, that code is ISF, coffeecult.com. Get yourself something great for the cold weather. A little road dog, maybe a little Ethiopian Harar, which is one of my faves.
I'll always champion the Sumatra. That is my favorite one thus far. Yep. Been making that almost every morning for the past week right now.
So good. So go check them out. Again, that's coffeecult.com. Brendan, InSession Film t-shirts. You got them?
Why aren't you wearing one?
Well, because I had to represent on this show.
Well, you still got the gold there, and then we still have a little gold in our logo, so I guess it kind of counts, doesn't it?
Yeah. So, yeah, exactly. Maybe I'm wearing InSession Film one. Nope, I'm not, but maybe I should.
Don't do that. Don't do that. Keep it on. Keep it on.
At any rate, we have some awesome t-shirts. If you go to InSessionFilm.com/store, you'll see all of the shirts that we have available. Whether it's our logo, we got Women in Session gear, we got Star Wars inspired logo shirts, we got Barbie inspired, we got a brand new Midnight Special shirt. We have a La La Land Moonlight shirt. In the spirit of award season, we're full on into award season.
Yeah.
Maybe the next one we'll have to make is It's Okay If Bradley Cooper Wants to Win an Oscar. Maybe that'll be the next shirt that we make.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. So, just doll up a little picture of Leonard Bernstein on it.
Yeah, so it's perfectly fine. That'll be the next thing, the next project once we get to the award show. But at any rate, go to InSessionFilm.com, or you can go to TeePublic. That's who we source it through. TeePublic.com/stores/InSessionFilm. You'll find all of our styles there for you to check out. We got them in green. We got them in white. We got gold logos, the regular logo.
Yep.
And if there's something else that you want, let us know. We can certainly make a different style if you wish. So just reach out to us. But go to InSessionFilm.com/store and get your InSession Film gear. I know the holidays just ended, but hey, a late gift is okay as well.
Doesn't mean you can't drink your great coffee call out of an InSession Film mug, right?
Exactly. So go get your InSession Film mug. Absolutely. So once again, InSessionFilm.com/store. All right. Well, with that out of the way, we can transition to what we're really here to talk about.
Movies.
And that is the best scenes of 2023 in film.
Yep.
We'll talk about
the most daunting task.
We'll talk about our top 10 movies at the InSession Film Awards on next week's show. the InSession Film Awards is coming soon. Be sure to subscribe. Stay tuned. Next week will be the 11th? The 11th annual? 10th annual? I'm not even sure.
We got to do the math on that, because if it is the 10th annual, that's a really big milestone.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty big. Yeah, because we've been doing 2023 would be 10 years. So
yeah,
it would be.
But then wouldn't have the first award show been in that first month of 2024?
Yes. Yeah.
So then I guess this is the 10th annual.
The 10th. Yep. It would have been the 10th. So this will be the 10th annual this year.
So basically, that's our way of saying it'll be 14 hours long.
Stay tuned. It's going to be great. Ryan and Jay are coming back.
Yeah.
But next week on the show, we'll be doing our InSession Film Awards. It's really great. I'll talk more about that at the end of this show.
Yeah.
And our top 10 movies of the year. However, for this show, we're talking about the best scenes of 2023. I'm very excited to get into this. So without further ado, we're going to jump on in. We didn't really have any criteria for this. At least I didn't.
Yeah.
I kept this to being a true list. These are my best scenes of the year.
Yeah, and I thought about that. We talked about this offline, JD, because I think that there have been times for prior campaigns and prior years where we tried our best to avoid some films and some scenes from films that would fall pretty high on our respective top 10 lists of the year, just to, not play those cards too early. But I'm kind of with you. When I was putting this list together, I found myself so passionate about this specific 5. And I'm not going to say whether or not these 5 end up in my top 10 of the year. Most likely, at least some of them do. But I felt like being as true to this exercise as possible was the way to go. So it sounds like we're in the same camp here.
Yeah, I wanted to be true to this. And I typically end up being that way with this list. Perhaps there are some exceptions, but given the strength of 2023, I think it was one of the best years for films in the InSession Film era. At the very least, it's one of the deepest.
It's one of the
deepest years.
Yeah,
hands down.
It's one of the most significant as far as this is where we're starting to see a bit of a turning point when it comes to commercial entertainment. And if we see any changes in the years to follow, it's mostly going to be because of what started in 2023. Whether it be Barbenheimer or some of these international films like Godzilla -1 that are doing fairly well. The fact that a Studio Ghibli film was #1 at the box office at one point, these are crazy notions I don't think we'd ever utter out loud, right? But the fact of the matter is you have that, and then the fact that the year is also just as deep as it is as you're talking about. It's another added bonus for sure.
Absolutely. I won't give anything away as far as what is on my list. However, I will say this, and I've never done this before in the InSession Film era. I compiled, usually when we do our top 10 movies of the year, and this will be the case next week.
Yeah.
We reveal our top 20s. We'll talk about our 10, but we'll reveal our top 20 movies of the year on next week's show. And I'll write about it on the site at InSessionFilm.com. I'll, of course, put up the list over at Letterboxd. However, this year is very different because usually I will reveal my top 20 on Letterboxd. Maybe I'll go to a 30 if I feel like the year is good enough.
Oh, we're going to a 50.
I have a top 50 this year, a top 50. And honestly, choosing the films for the 50 wasn't even that hard. Like arranging them for sure. But I couldn't just cap my list at 20 or 30 or even 40 because there were films on it that I think were deserving to still be recognized in some way.
Yeah.
So like the films in my, and I mean this very seriously, like the films in my 40 through 50, I still love, admire deeply.
I'm still quite high on those films as well. And also keep in mind, I got married this year, so I didn't see nearly as many movies as you or most of our film critic counterparts. At this point now, I haven't even quite crossed the 100 film mark of new releases just yet.
Yeah.
And I'm still ready to say that my top 50 is quite good, if not great. Now, granted, I knew what films to kind of look out for, so I didn't watch as much garbage or missed opportunities, I guess you can say. Yeah. I was a bit more picky and choosy, and I had the ability to do that. But the fact that I still have like 50 films where most of these films are not even rated below 3 to 3.5 out of 5 stars on Letterboxd. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah. I mean, and that won't change much, Brendan, if you and your lovely wife end up having kids, because
we want to.
How I have to live my life. I simply can't watch 450 movies in a year anymore. So, unless I'm going to see The Flash, because we're going to review it here on the show, I tend to watch the movies that I think will be satisfying, that will be good, that might end up being some sort of awards player. Not that it always equates to me agreeing with the consensus. That's certainly not the case.
No, but at the same time, we've been doing this long enough to know what we're most likely going to respond to.
Yeah,
it's less so about critical consensus and more so knowing the filmmakers we admire, who we've learned to love over the years, the types of films that we gravitate towards. It's just like it's almost like a form of internal marketing, right? Like we know what we respond to.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like, for example, that movie that just released on Netflix with Ethan Hawke and it was Julia Roberts. Like that film,
Leave the World Behind?
Yeah, that film got terrible reviews. Now, if I'm limited because of my lifestyle, being a father of two, do I spend my time with that, or do I watch Hirokazu Koreeda?
Of course you watch Hirokazu Koreeda, especially when that former is like 2.5 hours long.
Exactly. Or am I going to watch The Taste of Things? Or do I want to catch up on some documentaries for the year? Like that's how I, that's how I have to do it as a father.
Yeah.
And how busy my schedule is.
We have to understand the taste of things.
Exactly. But I still watched, I think I counted on Letterboxd. I still watched like close to 150 new releases this year.
Yeah.
So,
I would have been near that if I, not only did I get married, but my best friend, who was my best man, also got married. So I had to fly to his wedding as well as his bachelor party, another bachelor party, my own bachelor party. So it's, I wasn't a movie critic for a little while this year. I'll simply say that. Yeah.
All right, let's get into this.
Okay.
Top 5 movies or movies. Top 5 scenes. Of 2023. All right, Brendan. What do you have at number 5?
All right, number five. I can bring this one up in the form of a question. In fact, as we're talking here, just don't mind me, JD. I have a few notes here that I'm just trying to pull over to the side so I can look at you while I'm talking at the same time. But anyway, I can bring up my number 5 in the form of a question.
Okay.
Do you think we have enough hot dogs?
That's a great question. Cut to overhead shot.
We need the music playing in the background too. Yeah, so this is my number 5. This simple edit is my number 5.
It's good.
It barely counts as a scene. It barely counts as a scene. But this simple statement by Julianne Moore, it's not just one of the best edits of the year, but I think it's also one of the best, if not the best, tone setters of the year.
Oh my gosh, big time, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's why I feel the need to include it, because it's a simple moment that further proves why Todd Haynes' direction is among the best of the year.
Yeah.
Because we talk a lot about what makes a good director. Sometimes it's the technical side of things. It's the sense of like project management in a lot of ways too. The vision that you're able to communicate between all of your respective teams. But here it's also about that idea of tone management. And that's a hard thing to do, especially for a film like this that is juggling what feels like multiple genres, even though it doesn't always feel like that it is. That's really the brilliance of not just this movie and Todd Haynes' direction, but I weirdly think this one line of dialogue and this one edit, that swell of music all compounding together, it's emblematic of just that idea of tone management. And that's why I feel the need to include it. It's just, what a way to set up this movie. It's absolutely amazing.
Good. It's so good. I completely agree for the reasons you're talking about. And I think an added element to it as well is that nobody weaves melodrama like Todd Haynes. He's one of the best at it. He loves examining the facade of suburban life in his movies. The idea that a picture perfect home is actually the American dream turned into this nightmare. And that film, May December, sees Todd Haynes going back to his roots.
Yeah.
And of course, in our review, I joked about how he's cooking with the hottest gas he's ever cooked with.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that gas being propane, of course, because of this scene. And
how many hot dogs were on that grill? There had to have been at least
20.
Yeah. I was about to say 50, which is a bit more of a hyperbolic way to say it, but yeah, it's amazing.
It's a great tone setter. I love the melodrama of that film and how he toys with it there.
Yeah.
And it's a great tone setter as you're talking about. But yeah, it to me, it's great, not just because of what it means for that film, but the idea of Todd Haynes going back to his roots, because I didn't know May December was going to be a melodrama in a Todd Haynes way.
Well, yeah, because I hear that plot synopsis. I think it's going to be more in line with something like Carol or Far From Heaven, especially given the fact that Julianne Moore is in it. But it's not one of those movies. It's pastiche in a similar way, but it's not the same kind of pastiche. That's what I love so much about Todd Haynes is the way he plays with genre and tone in such a unique way.
Yeah, very good stuff. Love that moment. All right. Going to a very different film for my number 5.
I love it.
I'm going to Jonathan Glazer's The Zone of Interest. And I'm simply calling this moment Rudolph's Legacy. So spoilers here for The Zone of Interest. In fact, maybe spoilers for the rest of this conversation.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. Now that we're on this subject, because we may talk about a few scenes that count as endings to their respective films.
Yes.
So spoiler alert for all of these potentially.
Exactly. Just a heads up. And this is a big spoiler for The Zone of Interest. Again, I'm just labeling this Rudolph's Legacy. And it's this incredible moment in this film because it's, of course, emphasizing Rudolf Hulse, one of the very, very worst offenders of the Holocaust. And here comes this moment at the end of this movie where he is forced to wrestle with his legacy. And it starts off with him coming down the stairwell, and he gets to the bottom of the stairwell, and we see that he's physically unwell from being drunk, vomits even there on the floor. Then there's a cut to a shot where the camera is at the end of this vacant corridor. We see Rudolph fully in the frame by the stairwell, and behind him is this giant black void, maybe the one from Under the Skin. This giant.
Yeah, you joked about
void.
that before, but you're not really wrong.
Yeah, and Rudolph,
there's definitely a stripping away of sorts that happens in both movies, right?
That's true. So there's this huge black void behind him. Rudolph is looking around confused. He looks at the black void with uncertainty. But then he quickly composes himself as if everything is okay, which I think is a striking microcosm of the film at large. Then Glazer cuts to something completely different. We go from Rudolph on the stairwell to the inside of Auschwitz as it is today.
Yeah.
With exhibits displaying shoes and uniforms and other objects left behind, showcasing that his horrors have become a memorial that highlights the lasting impact of his legacy as one of the most vile humans of the 20th century. It's almost as if Rudolph transcended time and space, which is what makes his reaction to it all the more distressing. Because what does he do? After Glazer cuts back to Rudolph, he composes himself. He's not at all affected by the images. He simply regains himself and walks away. It's a blistering moment that profoundly demonstrates how someone can be so complicit and desensitized to the horrors being committed that even when looking at their own legacy, at his own legacy, it doesn't faze him. And that's exactly what we see with Rudolph in that film. Constantly throughout. It is a remarkable moment of direction by Glazer. The craftsmanship is sensational. It's I did my best to articulate it, but it's a moment.
I think you did good.
I appreciate it. It's a moment that is so incredible, and how it taps into the themes of the film, but in this unique Jonathan Glazery kind of way that I was tantalized by how it unfolds.
Yeah, and this is something I don't think we really talked about during our review of the film, but we talked about the literal retching moments leading up to that. And what I think is so brilliant about those individual moments is that it's almost as if Jonathan Glazer is setting you up to fail, right? It's almost like a bait and switch. He's setting you up to think, oh, this is the moment where this character, Rudolph here, is going to have this coming of age, this epiphany, this recognition that what he's doing is wrong, only for that moment to happen that you're talking about. And no, it doesn't do that. Yeah.
Unfazed.
Yeah.
Completely and utterly unfazed.
Yeah.
Unreal.
Just like the retching itself, it's kind of gross. It's kind of gross.
Very, very gross.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a stunning moment, an absolutely stunner of a moment.
Absolutely.
That I will soon not forget.
Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely. So that was your number
4.
5.
That was
so
my number
5.
5.
Yeah. So my number 4, I'm going to the film Fallen Leaves from director Aki Kaurismäki.
I hope it's the theater scene.
Oh, it absolutely is the theater scene. And it's and we are kind of in a spoiler territory right now, JD. So I think it's time. We were sort of cryptic with what film they go and see, right?
Yeah.
When we reviewed this film on the InSession Film Podcast.
Yeah.
I think we could say it now, right? Let's go ahead and say it.
Yep.
Our 2 leads here, played by, let me pull them up just to make sure I get their names right again, played by Alma Poisti and Jussi Vatanen, both amazing in this movie, especially Alma Poisti. I think she gives one of the best performances of the year. For their first date together, or at least one of their first dates, they go to the movies together. And what do they see? Jim Jarmusch's The Dead Don't Die. It's
so good. So good.
And they have an insightful and positive conversation about it.
Yes, they do.
Yeah. Yes. I like this movie. I think it's kind of fun. I think the charm of this scene is the fact that it's, of all the movies they could go and see in the theater together,
it's that one.
They go and see that one and have a lovely and beautiful conversation about it, and they have a lovely date because of it.
A good film. They went to see a good movie.
They went to see a good movie. They went. It's a good movie.
Validate my opinions on that movie.
And they have a legit conversation about it. But kind of like how we just talked about with Jonathan Glazer in The Zone of Interest, sort of playing with expectations in your pick. I feel like Aki Kaurismäki is sort of doing that here, because the theater they go to is littered with posters of Charlie Chaplin, the film Brief Encounter, and the French New Wave, which are very clear influences on Fallen Leaves. And you would think for a movie that technically is a romance, a comedic romance as well, they would go and see one of those movies, right? Yeah. No, they see The Dead Don't Die.
The Dead Don't Die.
It's sheer,
unreal.
The idea of it is enough to make it one of the funniest scenes of the year.
It's so hilarious. I mean, because this is a movie that is very brazenly this dry humor, this very Jim Jarmusch kind of humor. And which I already love. I love Jarmusch. I love The Dead Don't Die for the same reasons. And so for this film, and I was already thinking that, like, I had Jarmusch on the brain even before you got to the theater moment. And then when they reveal that's what they're watching, I almost fell on the floor. Like I was dying. And then to your point, on top of that, they have this conversation about it afterwards. It's incredible how this film, Fallen Leaves, how it wears those influences on its sleeve, and it directly affects these characters, but it's so great.
I love it.
And again, it also adds to what I talked about in our review of how that film plays with time. Yeah. It's a film that is set in the modern age in Helsinki, because we hear these radio broadcasts throughout the film about the current war between Russia and Ukraine. So we know it's taking place now, but everything, like aesthetically, that film looks like the 1960s. It feels as if those characters have been transported to a different time and place.
There are different decades. It almost, I don't know if this is an actual fact, but it almost feels like there are different decades sprinkled throughout the film in some way, aesthetically or even conversationally. Like, it's a very lived-in film. Our friend Jay Lebed on his Letterboxd page for this movie wrote that it's probably the most lived-in film of the year, and I don't think he's wrong with that. Like, it just, like, the setting and the way it feels all lonely and dilapidated and like all encompassing from a time of place standpoint. It feels like a character. It really does.
And The Dead Don't Die is another element of that, because that's not that film came out, what, 6 years ago?
Yeah.
7 years ago? Like, it's been a long time.
Something like that. Yeah.
It's been at least 5 years.
Yeah.
So it's not a new movie, but they're going to the cinema. Like, what cinema is showing that movie is what my point. In 2023.
Well, wherever, I mean, if that's the one reason why I would love to go to Helsinki now, is to just go to this theater and see if they're playing The Dead Don't Die.
The Dead Don't Die. Like, that's such a random movie, such a random movie.
Yeah.
To have in a theater in 2023 or 2022 when this was presumably shot.
Oh, it's so interesting.
It's so fascinating.
I love this movie. I mean, I can almost like argue that at 70 to 80 minutes long, it's like one continuous scene that I can include for this list. But this particular moment at the theater is it's one of the best moments of the year. It really is.
Oh my God, I laughed so hard. It's great.
So good.
Great moment. For my number 4, I'm going to The World of Scorsese, Killers of the Flower Moon.
Good stuff.
And I'm going to talk about the theater scene. And
speaking of theater scenes, nice.
Yep. So we're going back to the theater. This is an astounding moment. This whole coda that we get at the end of Killers of the Flower Moon.
So jarring.
It's so jarring. Late Scorsese to me is just on another level.
This like legacy era of him. I feel like that's the only way I can describe it. It's so interesting. I love it.
It's fascinating. And similarly to what he does in Silence and The Irishman, the ending to this film refilters everything that we had witnessed in this reflective, introspective way that just leaves you gobsmacked, because we are forced to reckon with the tragedy of this in a way that is only accessible because of the audience that was willing to listen to it. Meaning that the case that takes place in Killers of the Flower Moon, that case gained notoriety in the 1930s because it was recontextualized in a radio broadcast as a way to demonstrate that the FBI, a group of mostly white men, was a force for good. And we can probably assume that the audience that was listening was largely white, something Scorsese also presumes given that initial shot. Yeah. And to add further irony to it, this is a story that has been mostly forgotten since the 1930s. It's not in the public discourse prior to this film coming out. It's not in school textbooks. And the only way we get access to it, sadly, is from a white filmmaker. Yeah. Something that a few of the Osage consultants on the film voiced when the film had its premiere.
Yeah.
But then there's also this incredible irony that what we see unfold, what takes place there as this radio broadcast recreation, it's kind of funny. You can't help but laugh at it. It's
very quirky,
very engaging, until we get to the cameo, until Mr. Scorsese himself comes on the screen, where he very poignantly points out that this story has been largely forgotten, and when Molly died, there was no mention about the murders in her obituary. And I think Scorsese himself standing on that stage is him once again somberly reflecting on the story and showing direct reverence toward Molly, because he knows that the only reason this movie gets made is because he's directing it, and it stars Leonardo DiCaprio and Robert De Niro.
In a weird way,
that's why it can't be about Molly exclusively, or more about the Osage people, because Hollywood would never have greenlit it. And he wanted to acknowledge that in some sort of way. And he does it in a very Scorsese way, again, a reflective way, mature way, in a way that only he could do now. I don't know if Scorsese from 1990 would have been able to do this.
Just like he could not make Silence when he originally wanted to. It would have been another Last Temptation of Christ, or some type, or at least Killers of the Flower Moon would have been some type of thriller, some type of crime epic. And it still is that, but this moment here it's almost like Scorsese admitting defeat in some way, not necessarily for him as a filmmaker, but really more as a representative of Hollywood. If anything, he's admitting Hollywood defeat. He's almost like a messenger for what is going wrong with Hollywood these days. So when there are criticisms out there, especially from members of the Osage nowadays, that someone like Scorsese is the one telling this story, this is Martin Scorsese's way of saying, I know, and it's unfortunate. Like it's interesting for a movie to get that meta. Like we see meta-ness in movies all the time, but not quite in this way. Like it's a movie that is celebrating movie making while also being critiquing. Well, it's also being very critical of itself that it exists the way it does in our time and place. That is such an interesting dichotomy.
I know it's incredible. I mean, most movies would not do that.
No.
Most filmmakers probably wouldn't do it. But I think it says something about Scorsese and where he is now as a filmmaker that
there's a maturity there.
There's a wisdom there. There's an awareness that no Osage filmmaker would be able to tell this story, at least not on this, with this kind of scale. Maybe an independent film with very little to no budget.
Well, yeah, and that's the difference. Like, would they be able to? Do they have the talent? Possibly. Would they be allowed to? Is really the thing.
Yeah,
and that's where I don't know if they would.
And the fact that Scorsese was willing to go there, and it still works. Like it's effective cinematically. The editing of it is great. Like there's an attention to detail that is remarkable.
Yeah.
And yet it's also this poignant moment of him, as you noted, just recognizing the unfortunate politics of Hollywood and how things still are to this day.
And the fact that one of the people on that soundstage, Jack White of the White Stripes, just further proves the literal whiteness of what he's going for. I don't know if that was the intent, but it's a very hilarious meta joke if it isn't. It's quite insane.
Okay, number 3. What do you got at number 3?
So number 3, I always like to I like to leave at least one pick on my top 5 scenes of the year for the film or the moment that made me cry the hardest. And in this case, it comes in the form of Alexander Payne's The Holdovers. And this is, again, a finale of sorts. It's not the final scene I'm going with. I'm actually going with the final meeting that Paul has with the director of the school, Hardy Woodrup, and the 2 parents of Dominic Sess's character of Angus Tully.
Okay.
And it's a very easy moment. Like there's nothing really complex or surprising about it. If you see movies like this, you know it's going in this direction, and you know that Paul is going to defend Angus and take the rap for what he did.
Mm-hmm.
But for a film like this to have a moment like that, as touching as it is, to end with a joke about penis cancer in human form, it's
so good. That better be his Oscar clip. That's all I'm saying.
I love that a movie like this can have such sincerity without abandoning its cynical ethos at the same time. So it still maintains that. And I also love the coda of that moment by reoccurring this great, or at least like this pre-joke of sorts about Paul's lazy eye and the way he references that. There's great storytelling happening in this movie by setting things up and making you remember them. So when they come up again, it's like, oh yeah, you did talk about that, didn't you? It's really good narrative storytelling and a reprisal of narrative beats and jokes, which I think this film does a really good job pulling all those things together. So yeah, it's just a scene that I'm going to find myself rewatching and probably tearing up a lot anytime I watch it, if I'm honest. So yeah, I think it's a very tender scene. Really good stuff.
Well, that's incredible to hear. I didn't get emotional in the ways that you did, but I do agree it is a tender, poignant moment that tethers impeccably to the film's central ideas. I know when we reviewed it, I talked quite a bit about how that film taps into this notion of the unexpected ways that strangers play in our lives and how sometimes that can even change the trajectory of your path. And that's exactly what happens in that moment. Although by the end of the film, by the time we arrive there, I don't know if they're strangers anymore, but I don't know if you could say they're more than acquaintances either. It's not as if they've bonded beyond the teacher student, roles. I don't know if it went beyond that too much, maybe a little bit. Especially given that last scene, I think there's certainly an acknowledgement of respect and friendship there.
Yeah.
But it's still this moment where they've spent a few days together, a week over the holidays. They did bond through that, of course, as we see in the film, in all of these crazy, unexpected ways. And here comes a moment where one character makes a choice that affects the other in this massive way.
Yeah.
It literally changed the trajectory of his path.
Yeah, and it's not surprising. If anything, it is expected. The film sets itself up for that. And if you've seen enough movies over your lifetime, you know where it's going, and it still works. Absolutely, still works.
Absolutely.
I think what works so well about it and why I have it so high on my list is not just the emotionality of it, but it's the brazen, literally I don't give a shit attitude of Paul Giamatti in that moment.
Oh my God,
and he still maintains that. When Angus's parents push back, why did you have a right to do that? You took him to see his father, and Paul literally says, "I don't give a shit." Like that's literally his response to his parents, not his parents, but Angus's parents.
Yeah,
like that's you almost want to get up and applaud. You almost feel that urge.
And that's something we had learned about Angus's mom at the very least. We learned more about his father later, but his mom isn't around. She doesn't care. She went on a vacation over Christmas without her son. There's clearly some sort of disconnect there.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I know it's her honeymoon, but it's also Christmas and New Year's. Like there's something that is clearly off there that would anger anyone that is close to Angus in that way. And Paul arriving at that moment, so I agree with you, even though I wasn't emotionally pulled the way you were. It is still this tender moment that you never would have thought possible given who he is at the beginning of the film.
For sure.
But it's incredible. Great
stuff.
Great moment. Love
great rewatch. Yeah. Merry Christmas, everyone. Merry Christmas.
Indeed. Although I will continue the trend for my next pick as far as being the most emotionally stirring moment of the year. Let's see if I can get through this. It is All of Us Strangers. It's Adam's conversation with his father. It takes place about halfway through the film.
I knew this film would be represented somewhere in your list. I'm actually surprised it's this early. I thought it would come a little bit later.
Yeah, no, this is a great moment. I love how it's a little antithetical to the moment right before with his mother, where there was a little bit of tension there as he comes out to his mother. She's not sure how to respond to it in a very 80s kind of way. And it still ends on tender, hopeful note, but there's certainly some tension there. This moment with his father is actually pretty charming and kind of funny at first. His father jokes that he always knew his little boy was quote unquote tutti frutti because he couldn't throw a ball for shit, is what he says. And I love Adam's response to it when he says, "You make me sound like a horrible cliche." To which his father says, "Well, can you throw a ball?" And he's like, "No." So it's this really funny exchange they have. It's heartwarming, but that's just Andrew Haigh setting us up as he brings the emotional sledgehammer. Because immediately following, his father tells him that he could hear him crying in his room after school. And he didn't say anything because he didn't want to think of his son as the kind of kid that everyone at school would pick on. He even notes that if it was him, he would probably pick on his son as well.
Yeah.
Which is why Adam never said anything to his father. And it's here where we see his father start to be more outwardly honest and apologetic, clearly recoiling in his regret and sorrow and the things he said that may have accidentally hurt Adam. You see the emotion on Jamie Bell. Starting slowly, subtly, that emotion comes. And it crystallizes with him saying, I'm sorry I never came to your room when you were crying. A line that will forever haunt me. It's remarkably powerful. But as I talked about in the review, it's not just the line and how it evokes memory and this deep sense of remorse in his father, but it's Jamie Bell's performance, the way he articulates it, the quivering in his voice, the genuine sense of sadness he exhibits is truly profoundly moving. It's incredible, and goes on to quintessentially demonstrate the gaping hole that's been left in Adam and how it shaped him into adulthood. Just a stunner of a moment that floored me.
Yeah, and so different from the first moment he has with his mom, right? Like I love
noted,
that those two moments that Andrew Scott has with both of his parents, it shows how each parent has their own method to their respective madness, right? Like it's a really interesting idea, and I think this is a great moment. I think Jamie Bell gives the best performance in the movie. I really do, and that's not to knock anyone else in it, but the fact that he's not as
my favorite, I think, too.
Yeah, the fact that he's not as heavily in the awards conversation is kind of unfortunate. I think he should. Yeah, I think he should. I think he gives one of the better supporting actor performances of the year. It's really quite great.
And I also want to note real fast as well before we move on, part of that emotion as well is how it builds to that emotional climax when he tells his son that he's sorry for not coming to him when he heard him crying in his room.
Mm-hmm.
There's a moment right before that where we hear Adam say, I have good memories too.
Yeah.
And one of those examples he brings up, he says, I always remembered you loved decorating the tree for Christmas. Now, I'm very much record on this show. Brendan and I had a very big debate about this some weeks ago, but I'm very much a decorate the tree kind of guy. I love it as well. That's another thing that just draws me closer to the Jamie Bell character here.
Oh yeah.
And that moment. Yeah. Because I love decorating the tree. I do it November 1st. I'm one of those guys.
Yeah, you're weird.
Shame me if you need to.
But at the same time, it's you take it down before I do as well, which is all because you were talking about it earlier, I guess in the beginning of this specific episode as we're recording this, that you've already worked on taking your tree down. Yeah. Ours is still up. We usually take ours down.
Weirdo now.
Well, Maris's birthday is January 13th. So we sometimes like to maintain that for a little bit until her birthday's done. So then it's like we're finally concluding the holiday celebrations then.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's the reason for it.
We have it about the same amount of time then.
I think maybe we do. Just I put it up at the right time. I'm kidding.
No. At any rate, I love that little moment. And honestly, it's there where you really start to see Jamie Bell as the father really start to recoil in his remorse and in his grief. Mm-hmm. Thinking about those good memories, something that apparently defined him when he was alive, loved decorating the tree. And it's from there, like that little moment from Adam spurns on what we get with that incredible line of, I'm sorry I never came to your room when you were crying. Those two things are just so intimately tethered together.
Absolutely.
And as someone that, as a father, of course, but as someone that just has that subjective trait as well.
Sure.
It just draws me closer to this moment. I just adore it to death.
Yeah. Probably made you love your son even more if that was even possible. And that's like a movie that has that kind of power on you as a father. That's saying something.
Yeah. Big time.
Yeah. All right. So then we're on to my number 2 here. And, I just got done talking about the holdovers at my number 3 as my quote unquote most moving moment of the year. In time, my number 2 could also occupy that same space, but it's still fresh on my mind. So it hasn't quite made it to that type of emotional release just yet, but I know I love this scene, and it is my favorite needle drop of the year. And when I say that, no, JD, it might not be the one you're thinking of, given how much we've talked about robot dreams for a while. It's not quite that. It's a film I just caught up with. I'm going with the film Perfect Days by Wim Wenders.
Oh, there's so many good ones.
There's so many good ones. I've got to go with the final one. Nina Simone's Feeling Good. That final needle drop. Quite possibly the best final shot of the year.
Yes.
Or at least final expressive shot of the year. that close up on Koji Yakusho's face, that lingering emotional release that he finally has over a song called Feeling Good. I mean, the soundtrack to this movie is so obvious that it still somehow works. But yeah, that emotional release, that moment of catharsis that was always going to happen. Like the film was always secretly building towards it, even if you didn't know it was coming. I think Yakusho might give the performance of the year. I'm that close to saying that I think it's my favorite performance of the entire year, regardless of category. And as you said, it's a movie that's full of needle drops, but this one just triggered such an emotional release that I think wraps up the movie and every all-encompassing idea on what it means to make small impacts for people that affect your day-to-day routine. And the way that's all represented in that one final shot, I think is just downright beautiful. This is a film I just caught up with. I was kind of blown away by it. This is where the final stretch leading into our award show, JD, is both the best exercise and the worst exercise.
I know.
I love this film so much.
Yeah, it's really great. I'm saddened we didn't get a chance to review it. We might just have to make it one of the first films we review as far as 2024 goes.
I think we need to, because I think it gets a release in the States in early January or maybe even late January. It's kind of one of those films that, like, if we were to look back on this year and try to decipher whether it's a film that came out in 2023 or 2024, we probably could make the argument that this is a 2024 film.
Or movie. Like one of those late January.
Yeah, but I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I'm still going to include it for this campaign because we got the chance to see it now.
Yeah.
And I do think this performance needs to be talked about now, especially leading up to its upcoming release. I'll tell you what, if we do give this film a full review, I'll talk more about this in the moment, but I did watch this with my wife, Maris, and even she was kind of blown away by it. And it did sort of remind her of someone she knew growing up with. So there was a little bit of a personal relationship that she kind of had to this story. But even then, at the end of it, she even looked at me and said, I think that's one of the best films I've ever seen.
Yeah. Well, you have a much more interesting wife, I guess, because I also watched this with mine and she was not impressed.
Because she still judges you for under the skin. So there's a little bit of that.
It's a little different than that because she watches this and all she says to me is, so it's him just getting up and going to work every day. I do that. I'm not impressed by that. I go to work every day too. She was being a little facetious, but that was her response.
I sit there and think, you know what? I'd love to watch that, Brandy. I'd love to watch you go to work every other day and just see what your routine is, because there's probably more of a story there than you realize.
Yeah, exactly. But it was so funny. She's like, it's just him going to work. I'd do that as well. I clean.
Oh God, she's such a doctor.
It was hilarious. I will say though, I love the synopsis for this film where it just says a janitor in Japan drives between jobs listening to rock music. I've never seen a synopsis be so goddamn accurate. That's all this film is.
I'll be the one that pushes back just a slight tad. It's not only rock music he listens to.
Oh, fair enough. Listens to music. How about that?
We'll go with that. I mean, it's mostly all like not even classic rock. A lot of it is like he listens to Lou Reed, the Velvet Underground, the Animals, but then he kind of branches into some R&B and soul with Nina Simone and some of those things. So it's old music. I mean, he listens to Van Morrison's Brown Eyed Girl at one point. You don't get more obvious with a soundtrack like that, but it's just so touching.
Yeah, I mean, he listens to it all on cassette tape. I'm
telling you, if this movie catches on, it better bring about the cassette tape revolution in the same way that the vinyl revolution
we joked about it earlier because I got a cassette tape from Amazon, I believe, for Air. Was that Amazon? I can't remember which studio.
That was an Amazon movie.
Amazon? Yeah. So they sent a cassette tape with the soundtrack to Air on cassette with a player that I have right over here that I could listen to at any moment. So maybe there is, between Air and this film, maybe the whole cassette trend is coming back. Who knows?
I know we're getting a little side tangented here a little bit, but my band just released some new music. We almost talked about doing some cassette tapes. Like we did CDs, but
that would be fun.
I know some local artists and some big time artists that are releasing cassette tapes now. I feel like there is talk of it making a vinyl like comeback. I don't know if it'll be in the same level of vinyl, but I at the same time, people are talking about it.
I mean, in the world we live in with digital media being obsolete in a way that's terrifying, I'm all for it coming back in any way, shape, or form. And musically, if cassette tapes is the way to go, I fully on board for my nostalgia to just be overwhelmed. So
I'll buy them.
Fascinating. And it's interesting because we talk about cassette tapes in Perfect Days. This is a film that takes place in the modern day, not in 1990, in the modern day.
Yeah.
And he still does everything tangibly.
They even visit a record shop, and he goes through that store's collection of cassettes and kind of browses around for a moment. And it's a cool looking record shop.
His camera's from 1992.
Yeah.
You know, still does the whole click and sending the roll to Kodak.
Oh gosh. I did not expect my pick of Perfect Days to get us down a rabbit hole on physical media, but it just goes to show the power of this movie. It's that good. Simple gesture, that simple inclusion can get you talking about physical media like this.
It's a great movie. I definitely look forward to talking about it. We should give it a review.
I think so.
Once we get through the award show next week.
Yeah, it's so good.
Yep, good stuff. All right, for my number 2, I'm going to the film Past Lives.
Okay.
And similarly to Killers, and I guess The Zone of Interest, I'm also going with that ending scene. It's stunning. So, Past Lives is a movie about longing and connection and time and closure. But specifically, what's so captivating about longing and connection in this film is how it examines that sometimes it's out of our control. You know, what we learn about Nora early on in the film is that she was young when her parents moved to Canada. She had no decision in that at all. Her life took a major turn and she was bound to it without any say whatsoever. However, on the flip side of that, sometimes we do have choices, because later on in the film, after her and this friend of hers, Hai Sang, they reconnect via Skype after a decade apart.
Yeah.
We see them reform that childhood bond, and we start to get a sense that there's something bubbling underneath the surface in both of them, only for Nora to have this realization that their lives aren't a fantasy.
Yeah.
That there's no practical way for them to be together. So she makes a choice that is heartbreaking. She leaves him behind to have these two separate lives. And I love the film's self-awareness and commitment to realism in all of that. As much as we all yearn for lavishing romance and stories that feel like fairy tales, the truth is that our practical lives don't always play out that way. And this film is wholly dedicated to that idea. But that's what makes the film's ideas on closure so compelling and vital to how this story plays out. In that final scene, Nora and Hai Sang have to find some sort of closure, even if they aren't willing participants, which is why they are. I love how Celine Song, how she edits from this initial goodbye. We get this hard cut to their childhood goodbye. And I think that is such a brilliant edit, because in that moment, as kids, they equally were not willing participants because they were kids.
Yeah.
They didn't know any better. They weren't thinking about how this goodbye would impact their lives. It's an incredible moment of visual storytelling and use of parallel. But in this final exchange, they do understand the stakes, which is why Hai Sang once again asks, what if this is a past life as well, and we are already something to each other in our next life, is what he says. Nora, of course, isn't sure how to answer that in the moment. I don't know, is her response.
Yeah.
But as soon as Hai Sang gets in the cab and drives away, she immediately crumbles, wrestling with that question. We see her walk down the pathway, initially, stoic, wrestling with that idea. And then immediately we get this level of raw vulnerability and catharsis right in front of her husband. It is astonishing how Celine Song is able to weave those layers together. It's perfection. It's elegant in terms of the performance, the stoicism of it all, the internal dialogue that's taking place, and also the outward poetic dialogue that we see. It is some of the best filmmaking I've seen all year. Similarly to how I talked about with After Sun last year, I could not fathom that After Sun was a directorial debut. Could not fathom it.
Yeah.
And this is another one of those films, and it's scenes like this. It's an ending like this that just takes your breath away, and how it crystallizes all of its ideas with these performances, without spoon feeding anything to the audience, without turning Nora's husband into some sort of antagonist.
Oh, John Magaro, you lovely man.
He's incredible in that film, but I love the writing of it as well. They could have easily have turned him into some sort of melodramatic antagonist, but Celine Song avoids that. He's as lovable and compassionate as he is throughout that entire film. But to see your wife crumble emotionally when she's having to say goodbye to a past lover, past friend, it's incredible. What a moment.
Yeah. There are a few scenes I was toying with to possibly consider for this list. I didn't end up picking one from past lives. I do have one in my honorable mentions, and the ones that is actually the bar scene, because it almost comes off like this weird third wheel of sorts, but the way it resolves itself without any form of traditional conflict, I think, is really quite profound. It's one of the best directorial efforts I think we've seen in quite some time. That's also a debut. Like this kind of confidence from Celine Song, who has never made a movie before, I think is just astounding. So we'll definitely be talking about a lot of her upcoming work for sure, because I think she's a talent that we're going to notice even like years down the line. But it's really great stuff there. I almost consider it for my list here. I guess that leaves our number ones, right? Yeah. I weirdly think we at least have a scene from the same film for each of our number ones. I don't know. You could surprise me. You might surprise me here. I'm going to Oppenheimer for my number one. All right. You're nodding. I think that means you have a scene from Oppenheimer.
Yep, that is
I'm going to the press conference scene.
The press conference scene. The one in the gymnasium?
Yes, the gymnasium scene.
Yep.
Is that your number one?
Yep.
All right. Well, after all of this time, not crossing over once, which is kind of a first for us, right, JD? It's kind of rare. Yeah, usually we find some crossover pretty early. We at least have the same number one, so I guess that counts for something.
Not just the same film, but the same exact scene. But it's the scene of the year. It is.
It's the scene of the year. It's all over social media. I feel like a lot of people would agree with that. And it might be an easy choice. Like a lot of our listeners might think, oh, can't you pick something else? But this is the best scene of the year. It's the best directed
hands
scene
down.
Of the year. It's a straight up horror movie scene is what it is.
Yep.
And for a movie that is so reliant on sound, here is a scene that works because of its absence of sound, or at least the way it plays with sound in a very creative way. And of course, an introspective way as we get into J. Robert Oppenheimer's own guilt and his own conscience for the creation that he made and what it was ultimately used for, and how he visualizes that in the form of everyone else dying. The moment I knew this was a great scene was when everyone stood up to applaud. You heard them stand up. Like you can hear the bleachers squeak, right?
Yep.
But you didn't hear the cheers or the applause.
Yeah.
But you could hear the movement, right?
Yes.
You could hear the practicality, the physical sense of place moving, ready to be destroyed at any moment. So the use of sound here is literally a character. It's something I can't say I've heard before. I was so taken aback by it. But yeah, it's a wonderful scene. I can throw it back over to you for additional thoughts on why it's so great.
Yeah, man, I echo everything you're saying. I mean, we've talked about how that film is Nolan at his most operatic, his most ethereal. You noted there a moment ago as well, his most horrific.
Yeah.
And this scene is a culmination of all of those things, as it's this haunting moment of deep regret, despite Robert's inventions being one of the most challenging and pivotal scientific breakthroughs in human history.
Yeah.
It's a moment that forever changed the world. And the way Nolan highlights that juxtaposition in this moment is some of the best work of his entire career.
Agreed.
As Robert begins backstage to somewhat muted chants of his name, and he starts walking to the stage with not only cheers, but the stomping on the bleachers, a sound design choice that had been foreshadowed throughout the entire film, suggesting Robert's torment. And you can clearly see the hesitation on his face. Cillian Murphy, incredible in depicting that in this moment. He goes on to start the speech, which starts off simple enough at first, but it doesn't take long before Nolan interjects as we see the background behind Robert start to tremble. The sound to what you're saying becomes disturbing, all while he's giving what seems on the surface is this rousing speech.
Yeah.
And you're right. The sound work here, oh my God, because you see people clapping. We see them cheering. But what do we hear? We hear a scream.
Yeah.
We hear a visceral rumbling noise. We see a light flash from a bomb that rips off the skin from members in the audience before ashes start falling from the ceiling. When all of a sudden, the crowd noise kicks back in, coupled with a disturbing musical cue that captures impeccably Robert's deep trepidation. And then how does it end? With him stepping on a dead body who's been turned into ash and dust, while we hear agonizing screams and cries from those he walks by as he walks out of the gymnasium. It is absolutely terrifying and immaculately demonstrates his paranoia and unraveling. It's breathtaking.
It's breathtaking.
Nolan at his best.
And what I love so much about it, the way you describe that scene and the sequence of things that happen and how it's visualized, how it's portrayed, how it's edited, all those things, it sounds like it could be a very obvious scene. And in some ways it sort of is, but what makes it so tricky is the way that like those obvious things reveal themselves. Like there is still something very fragmented about that scream you mentioned, that scream that you mentioned that Oppenheimer himself hears in the background. It's sort of quick. It sort of comes out of nowhere, and you almost have to think to yourself, wait, did someone just scream? Was that what that was? There's a lot of trickery happening to almost trick the audience into what it's doing without directly telling you the obvious nature of what it's doing to J. Robert Oppenheimer.
Yes.
So like the cryptic nature of it all, I think, is what makes it even more brilliant. And that's something that Christopher Nolan is really good at. He's really good at cryptic timelines and sort of keeping you on your toes. And I think this scene does a great job maintaining that without getting too obvious with it.
Yeah. And it's one of the best uses of close-up I think we've seen all year. I love the trickery of it. You're right. I mean, to see the background behind Robert trembling and causing some sort of disturbance, and you juxtapose that to the reverse shot where we get the crowd and you see them cheering and mostly quietly. I love the sound design work is incredible, but those close-ups on Cillian Murphy as he exhibits utter fear and paranoia is astounding work. Astounding.
It's one of the best performances of the year. Yeah,
I know.
Yeah.
Like, you mentioned Perfect Days, the performance there, the holdovers. Best actor at the InSession Film Awards is going to be a nightmare for me. I don't know what I'm going to do. Because I mean, I love Koji Yakusho in Perfect Days. Giamatti, one of the best, if not the best performance of his career. Same thing with Cillian Murphy. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going to have to roll the dice. Literally.
You're going to have to.
Way I'm going to have to.
And you're only naming 3 performances. Trying to make it 5.
There's 2 others. Yeah, like it's an incredible year and from a best actor perspective. And my God, yeah, it's going to be a fun category to talk about. That's for sure. But Cillian Murphy, I don't want to because it's easy. I've been championing Paul Giamatti a lot on social media. I kind of want him to win the Oscar, but I will not be disappointed or upset if Cillian Murphy wins. And in some ways, I equally want him to win at the same time.
Yeah. So if it's going to be one of those two, then no one loses.
Exactly. We don't lose. We win no matter what.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yep. That's what we like to see with award shows. So that way that we don't need the competition. We don't need the sports aspect of it.
We don't need to turn it into sports. We talked about sports earlier.
Yeah, that's all it was.
Doesn't need to be sports. At any rate.
Does not.
I know you probably have a long list of honorable mentions, as do I.
I've got a few. Yeah, I'll keep it brief because I'm sure some of them are on your list as well. But I did sort of jokingly reference the needle drop of Earth, Wind, and Fire September in Robot Dreams. So that's definitely one of them there. And keeping to the animated theme, a film I did want to include in my top 5 for this list here was The Boy and the Heron, or How Do You Live, as we should be calling it. But I couldn't really think of a scene because like that's not really a movie of scenes, right?
I have one.
Okay.
The moment of the old wizard talking to Mahito at the end.
Okay, then we're probably in a similar camp because the one I did write down here was The Kingdom Collapse. Which I think is the same thing. Yeah, so but kind of more of a byproduct of the one you're talking about. But it's a film that kind of flows more like a dream than it does with individual scenes. So it was kind of hard to really pull something without it feeling like it was only a sliver of something bigger. But I did at least want to acknowledge that there are moments in The Boy and the Heron that I just can't shake, and that's definitely one of them. A few others here: The Iron Claw, the Tom Sawyer montage, I think is really great. The Taste of Things. The final shot, that wraparound final shot, revealing our two main characters once again, I think is quite poignant. You mentioned Past Lives. I'll go ahead and reiterate the third wheel bar scene that I sort of called it. I think it's quite great. The plane crash from Society of the Snow is very effective, very harrowing scene. We talked about All the Strangers already. I'll reference the diner scene as well. I think it's quite great. The argument flashback scene in Anatomy of a Fall is one that I know a lot of people will talk about, but in actuality, pretty much any scene involving our young actor there, I think is really worth mentioning for all the reasons I'm sure we'll talk about when we get to the award show. Let's see a few others here. The probably one of the biggest laughs I got in the theater that isn't really supposed to be a laugh, but the ridiculousness of it just made me laugh. It's the staircase fall from John Wick Chapter 4.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
So that's definitely one in there. The musical number Hell No from The Color Purple is one I thought about. The final scene from Monster, Hirokazu Koreeda's film. The Alien from Asteroid City, I'll simply say. Enzo visits his son's grave from Ferrari, I have here as well. Yeah, probably my favorite scene from that movie. And the last one I'll say here, and then I'll toss it over to you. And it's not really a scene because I couldn't pick just one, but anytime Jeffrey Wright takes on the role of Stag R. Lee, I think it's amazing. Anytime he takes up that persona, I think it's great. So really, it's an all-encompassing pick for that movie.
Yeah, good stuff. Yeah, I love that. As far as some honorable mentions for me, Anatomy of a Fall, the moment at the end.
Oh, that's another good one.
Is a scene I want to highlight because I've seen that clip of the flashback of the wife and husband arguing. That is maybe the 10th best scene of that film. I'm sorry. It's good.
It's no, good. No, you're not wrong. It's the first one that just came to mind because I knew I at least wanted to represent that film in some way.
I feel like people love when characters get heightened and just want to argue and throw things. And look, those are riveting scenes. I'm not denying that they're not, but those often don't make for the best scenes for me because that's easy to do. I could yell and scream and get all angry. It's the nuance within those that sometimes I really love. In fact, I'll mention one here in a little bit. That is to say, it's a good moment. It's necessary for the character.
For sure, yeah.
But the best moment of Sandra Hüller in that film is at the end in the car. When she tells a joke to help cope with this harrowing situation she just went through and try to bring a moment of levity. It offers a few laughs, and those laughs quickly turn into cathartic tears. And she has a total breakdown in the car. That to me is by far her best moment in that film.
It's a great scene. It's incredible. It's a really great scene. Yeah.
The other moment, going back to the little kid. Oh my God, he's so good in this film. Mm-hmm. I think of the moment, and again, maybe I'm just against the grain on this film with a lot of people, even though I do love it. Because the scene I feel like people talk about is his testimony. Again, great moment. But what I go to is the moment with the judge. The judge doesn't want him to tell his testimony, or doesn't want him to be in the courtroom because he's about to hear some things about his parents that could be disturbing to him.
Sure.
And, she says, the judge tells him, I don't want you to experience pain, is what she says. His response is, I'm already hurting. I'm already in pain. That,
what a wise kid.
His best moment. Oh my God, it's crushing.
I don't think we said his name yet, but Milo Mikado Granier, I believe is how we pronounce his name. For pronouncing that wrong, we apologize. But what a great performance. What a great job performance, especially.
So those are my two scenes from Anatomy. The grandma scene in the zone of interest, I heavily thought about for this before going with the Rudolph moment I talked about earlier.
Gotcha.
Similarly, the moment of Hedwig fighting for her home in the zone of interest is disturbing on all kinds of levels. May, December, I got 2 for that. The Portman monologue, I think is incredible.
Yeah.
And the rooftop scene from May, December.
Yeah, I thought about that, but I just couldn't shake the hot dogs.
Of it all.
Just couldn't shake the hot dogs.
I love a good hot dog scene. The ending goodbye and the holdovers is great.
Yeah.
The Christmas dinner scene, I love in the holdovers.
That's I feel like that's getting memeified now, isn't it?
A little bit. In a great way, but yes,
in a great way. Yeah, I love it. I love it. But if there's anything that's going to make that movie catch on, I'm glad it's something.
Yeah. The alien sequence, I believe you mentioned in Asteroid City, or the alien song. I can't remember which one of those you mentioned.
Yeah.
I very much agree there. The Margot Robbie theater scene in Asteroid City, I really love.
Yeah.
And the Jason Schwartzman, Scarlett Johansson, excuse me. Yes. Their scenes I love in that film as well.
Oh yeah. Great stuff.
Back to Oppenheimer, I believe we did, is maybe the best ending of the year. The Trinity test, of course, and Kitty testifies are all great moments in Oppenheimer. Across the Spider-Verse, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, Miles and Gwen reuniting, having that moment upside down, I think is really great. Miles choosing his own path in that fight versus Miguel, I think is really great in that film as well. Ferrari, you mentioned the opening grave. I have that here as well.
Yep.
The crash sequence. I know we talked about the effects of it, but the emotional component of it, I think, is great. Worthy of an honorable mention.
I tried watching that crash sequence again, and the crash itself just does not look good. It just really doesn't. It takes me out of the movie so much. But man, the aftermath of it, and just the fact that Michael Mann chose to include it, like I'm glad it's there. I just don't like the rendering of what's there. But to your point, the aftermath, which I think we want to focus most on.
Yes.
That aftermath shot, that simple panning shot where we actually see the destruction firsthand is very effective.
Yes. And how it creates parallels between or with death and Enzo in that film, I think is important. So I think it's worth noting.
For sure.
So here's where I'm going to somewhat counter myself to Anatomy of a Fall, but I have my reasons here. So I'm going, my other moment in Ferrari is the big fight that we see there.
Yeah.
And the reason that this one feels a little different to me, even though, again, I will recognize how contradictory this might sound. Though the big fight in Anatomy of a Fall is great. It is well acted. I don't think it gets to the emotional depths that the one in Ferrari does. So we get Penelope Cruz as Laura, who I think gives one of the best performances of the year as well.
Oh, she's so good.
And the thing with her character in Ferrari is that everything has been taken from her. She did give Enzo a son, and that was ripped from her. Enzo has another son with another woman. So as far as his lineage goes, he's okay. Laura doesn't have that. Hers has been ripped from her. So she and on top of this, she is blindsided by the fact that Enzo has another son. She isn't surprised that there's another affair. There's been countless of those, but she didn't know that he had another son. So you compound that shock with her grief. And as we see at the beginning of this film, at the grave scene that you mentioned earlier, we know that she's grieving still. So it leads to this emotional climactic moment where she just unloads on Enzo. And I think it gets to an emotional depth that to me is necessary for this film, despite it being this big, huge moment. And from Enzo's perspective, you know, he's fighting for, you know, the idea that he did love his son. He did everything he could.
Yeah.
You know, what is he supposed to do? And so you get these kind of myopic viewpoints kind of clashing in this moment. The other big moment for me, this is subjective, but this is the other thing for me and why I included here. There's a moment in this scene when Adam Driver as Enzo says specifically that he loved his son. He did everything he could for him. And when he says that, I loved my son, you hear his voice crack.
Oh,
that was enough for me.
That was enough for you.
Enough for me.
Basically, it's your performance then. It's basically you doing it.
It's so good. I immediately.
I think Adam Driver took some notes from J.D. Duran on this one.
So good. The ending scene in The Iron Claw is another big one for me, as we talked about in the review. If you listen to that, the sequence, the overlay shot of the three brothers in The Iron Claw is another big moment.
Yeah.
The overhead sequence in John Wick 4 I have on here. The whole stage play sequence in Beau is Afraid. I'm Just Ken from Barbie is one I have on here. The opening sequence to The Killer is another big one.
Yeah.
Rachel McAdams explaining her parents and Are You There, God, It's Me, Margaret.
Good pick. Good pick.
The cathedral scene in Maestro, the Mulligan opera scene in Maestro, I really like.
Yeah, that one especially.
You talked about the theater scene in Fallen Leaves I have here as well. The ending scene in Perfect Days, the bar scene in Past Lives, you mentioned all of that. The fire scene in Killers of the Flower Moon, the cafe scene in All of Us Strangers, the Power of Love scene in All of Us Strangers. How about when the 54 Godzilla theme kicks in Godzilla -1?
Yeah, I'm surprised we didn't mention that one yet. That got a lot of the Godzilla nerds up in a tui for that one. Did I just make up a word there, a tui? I think I just made something up.
And then the last two I have here, you mentioned the plane crash in Society of the Snow. So the last one I'll emphasize here is, you think you're so great because you have boats.
Man, I want to see that director's cut so badly. I was weirdly hoping it would have been out before we concluded the year. But now I guess if we do get it, we got to count it as a 2024 film.
Yeah, we might have to. At any rate, those are our scenes of 2023.
Good stuff. Good stuff.
Great year for film. We'll talk about it more next week on the InSession Film Awards, which I do want to note here briefly. We'll put out a post on the website at InSessionFilm.com if you want to see it in more detail. But the InSession Film Awards is a mix mash of some fun categories that are our own and the conventional Oscar-y kind of categories. So we'll do things like Best Director and Best Cinematography and Best Actor and all that sort of fun stuff. But we also have categories like Best Overlooked Movie, Best Surprise Movie. Even song for us is a little different. It's best use of song. It's not original song, just use of song.
It can be original song, but it's really
original.
Yeah. It's the utilization.
As we've noted already in this conversation on this show, there are some incredible needle drops this year.
A lot.
That are so effective, and that's why we wanted to organize that category that way.
Right.
Original songs are great. Hell No, awesome moment.
Absolutely.
Awesome moment. I'm Just Ken, great moment. There are some great uses. Peaches. Oh, I'm so mad that's not on the short list.
I'm fine.
So mad.
I'm fine with it. That song's okay.
That song is great. Spoiler alert, will win that category for me.
Oh, gosh.
It's one of the best. Hands down. Not even close. Not even close. I would take it over Barbie. I would take it over a lot of things.
Oh, you're adorable. That's all I'll say. You're adorable.
Objectively great. That's all I'm saying.
I mean, it can't be. I mean, if it's objectively great and I say it's bad, then you're basically saying I'm wrong in that, and I don't appreciate that. I'll simply say that.
Objectively great.
No, it's not. It can't be objectively great if I don't like it.
Okay, I'm obviously being facetious. That's the whole point of, at any rate. Great song. But my point is, as much as I love a good needle or a good original song, needle drops can be just as good, just as effective.
If not better.
I mean, and we've talked about a couple of them in Perfect Days, Robot Dreams, Iron Claw. And those are just a few examples. This was a pretty elite year for needle drops. So pre-existing or original, we're open to it all.
Absolutely.
So anyway, that's the InSession Film Awards. That's a little preview. I'll put out a post later on this week at InSessionFilm.com if you want to see all of the categories. That'll be part 1. Part 2 of the award show is our top 10 movies of the year.
Yes.
We'll simply count down, and it's going to be a lot of fun.
Ooh,
so stay tuned for all
about.
Of that. I think that's it.
I think that's it, man.
Else?
I think that's it. Yeah, I'm someone that's still trying to get over a sinus infection. I've made it through this 1.5 hour long episode. If we keep talking, I might die.
Yeah, no. Well, I think we can end it there.
Yeah.
Just want to say a thank you to our patrons. You guys are awesome. Thanks so much for supporting us. If you want to help out the show, patreon.com/InSessionFilm is a great way to support us. As far as reviews this week, I do want to emphasize we have 4 of them. The Iron Claw should be out already by the time this episode goes live.
I wish I was there for that one. I didn't get a chance to make it to that. I've seen the movie, but didn't get a chance to make it to that review.
I know, because poor Brennan's been very sick. But we will also have reviews of The Color Purple, Origin, the Ava DuVernay film Origin, and then also J.A. Bayona's Society of the Snow.
Yep.
We will have reviews for all of that coming soon. And after the award show, we'll have one for Perfect Days. So be on the lookout for that.
Yeah. We talked about this a little bit already, JD, that once we finish the InSession Film Awards, both parts, we might have to take a little bit of a break. Now, let's also review Perfect Days right away. I'm down with that.
Yeah, I'm down with that as well. And look, after the award show is when we typically talk about our most anticipated films of the year. I'm quite excited to do that exercise as well. So,
gosh, yeah, this year looks pretty stacked already.
Yeah, it looks pretty good. So I'm excited to dive into all of that. But first, the award show. So be on the lookout for all of that next week. Be on the lookout for those reviews as we end our 2023 campaign. Also want to note Women in Session. Their latest episode is up as well. It was Kristen and Zeta and Brian Suspielis as a guest joined for that episode where they talked about Oscars, specifically honorary Oscars, how that's evolved over the years.
Absolutely.
It was a fun show, so be sure to go and check that out. You can follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. If you're watching us on YouTube, leave a comment below, subscribe to the channel, like the video, all that fun stuff. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please rate and review us there. It really helps out the show quite a bit. And I think that's it. Brendan, any final thoughts on anything?
I'm going to go rest my voice, but hopefully everyone had a happy new year. Once again, we'll echo that. 2024, I got to get used to saying that. That's a very weird thing to say.
Yeah. Yeah, I hope everyone had a great New Year's as well. Hopefully you all had a great Christmas, being around family, friends, eating all kinds of food as I did. One last note on the award show. So typically the award show and the top 10 show come out back-to-back days.
Yes.
That will not happen this year.
Yeah, we have apparently something important happening on Monday.
Next Monday, there's a big game that apparently I have to stay tuned for, which kind of disrupts our recording schedule slightly.
Which, honestly, it's kind of a blessing in disguise because I think having that break between 2 really long shows is kind of nice.
It probably will end up being
in a
nice
way,
practically.
In a way, I thank your Wolverines for that.
There you go. Usually we put those out back-to-back days. This year there will be a day in between. So don't be caught off guard by that. It's already pre-planned.
Absolutely.
At any rate, looking forward to all of that. So stay tuned. We're almost done with 2023, and then we'll transition to the new year. With all of that said, go Blue. Thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on the InSession Film Podcast. Christopher Nolan horror film, question mark?
I'll see it. I'll pay for that.
Or maybe he should do Peaches. Great song.
Okay.